What's up, Pitt fans? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. He is Chris Carter. I am Noah Hiles, and together we are your Pitt beat reporters here for the PG, here to answer your questions as we do each week. Chris, a very eventful week for Pitt, just in general. I mean, with football bringing all the recruits to the game Saturday, with basketball knocking off number 11 Virginia a week ago from when this will run. Things are getting interesting here for Pitt basketball.
Absolutely, and this was part of the excitement that people were hoping to build. No, we were talking about this run that they were about to have with the 4 games leading up to this. We were talking about like maybe if they could get 1 or 2 wins out of the next 4 of playing North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, and Duke, that would be a nice win. They got 2 in a off the bat and almost had a third against Clemson, and now they're on the road against a ranked team on Duke this upcoming Wednesday. But I think it says that this team is at least right now in a much better place than many people gave them credit for. And I think there's a lot more on the bone for this team, for them to be able to pull off this season.
So we got a lot of questions about Pitt basketball. We actually had one about football, so I think we should start off with that one and then just ride the rest of the show out about basketball. So Derek wants to know, though, on the note of football, Jared Wayne, who declared for the 2023 NFL draft late last week, over the weekend, I think. Yes. Friday. Derek wants to know, how big of a loss is Jared Wayne? Was his departure anticipated? I'll let you start on that one, Chris.
I'll answer that the way that I think Pat Narduzzi would answer that. And that, you always have to be prepared for something like this to happen. Jared Wayne was an all ACC wide receiver this year. He put up really good numbers with not good quarterback in Keaton Slovis. And I think that he saw that and he said, you know what? I'm not sure if I'm going to put up that much better numbers next year. I'm just going to go to the NFL now. Could he have stuck around? Probably, and he probably would have still been the number 1 receiver. But I also imagine, I think Pitt is excited with Konate Mumfield, a guy that they really didn't tap into enough this year, and they got young up and comers in the receiver room that they want to feature. And I think that this is part of the challenge now for a lot of programs, a lot of guys that you've held on to for years, because of COVID rules and having extra guys. Now you're having to decide, do you want to keep them around for an extra year? John Morgan, a guy who could have stuck around as an extra edge rusher for another year next year. He's moving on to another program. There's no doubt that there was talks in the room about like, hey, we got to make some tough decisions here. So I think Jared Wayne's a part of that. I look at guys like Jake McConaughey coming up. They're pulling in guys, out of the portal. There's still the Dante Cephas talk that could actually happen. But I think a lot of this is just the influx status that college football is always in, and how Pitt has to be ready for it. So surprised, not totally, but that I do think that there was a legit hope that he might stick around for 1 more year just to be the leader of that room next year.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I think that they would have liked to see him stick around. I think that Jared Wayne is an NFL caliber receiver, but I kind of look at his departure similar to Brandon Hills, where if they both came back next year, they'd be the 2 best players on this team. Mm-hmm. I think they would probably both, if everything went well, have enough attention on them entering the season where they'd get All-American consideration. And they could be top end contributors, and it probably would have helped their draft stock. I'm not sure where either of them lands in the NFL draft. I think obviously it'll come down to how they do at the combine, but I mean, there's a lot of good receivers in this year's NFL draft class, and but that's going to be the way pretty much from here on out. Just the way college football is now. There's just a lot of talent at that position each year. I'll be interested to see how things work out for Jared. I personally thought he would come back. That's not based on anything I've heard. It just seemed like that would probably be the better play in his interest, but he must have heard otherwise. Someone must have, let him know that he has a chance to go in a decent round in a decent place in the NFL draft. And that was good enough for him. And that's exciting. If you're someone like Jared Wayne, who's worked really hard. And like you pointed out, Chris, he had a really good year this year with some pretty subpar quarterback play, 1,000+ yards receiving, only 11th time that's happened in Pitt program history. So that's pretty significant. So, I think that Pitt, like you said, though, is prepared for anyone to leave at any time, because that's just how college football works. Now they have 3 marquee guys that they're targeting in the transfer portal. Like you mentioned, Cephas. There's the 6'7" receiver from Bowling Green that they're looking at, and they also just offered a receiver from Michigan who's in the portal right now as well. And those are just the ones that we're aware of. So I wouldn't be shocked to see another portal guy come in and join Bub Means and Konate Mumfield in the starting lineup come next year. So we'll transfer over now to basketball. And Chris, this is a question that we get emailed to us at least once a day, every single week. It's something for the mailbag every single week, and just, comments and concerns. Everyone wants to know, when it comes to Pitt basketball, what's the status of Pitt's John Hugley? They certainly could use him underneath the hoop, says Tom, who reached out. And Tom, thank you for reaching out and asking this question. And you're one of many people who want to know what's going on with John Hugley. And as of the time we're recording this, Monday afternoon, there's not much of an update. I mean, this is something that both of us have asked numerous times about since he started, sitting out due to personal reasons. When would that have started? Prior to maybe
after Sacred Heart.
After Sacred Heart, right. So, yeah, he was benched for a game after Pitt lost to Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. They beat the Panthers beat Sacred Heart with Fetty in the starting lineup. Fetty had a fantastic game.
Yes, he did.
And I think it kind of showed, like, hey, we can ride Fetty until John figures out whatever's going wrong with it. Something on the court, it could be injury related, it could be personal stuff. We've been told it's not injury related. But, who knows what this really is? And we have no information on anything. We've asked Capel every time we've pretty much seen him, be it media availability or after a game. Hey, do you have an update on John? No update. All we know is that he has been practicing in some form of capacity, is what I was told by a Pitt spokesperson. And he's with the team every game. He's on the bench in sweatpants. He's there in warm-ups. So that's all we know. We have no idea when it comes to his timetable, although we will continue to ask.
I think the big thing here is that he is available to the team. It's not that he's left the team, because a lot of people, I think that's the panicking thought, is that John Hugley's left the program, and it's like, oh, great, another transfer, losing a big name player. But I don't think that's in the cards right now. I think the big thing that you're looking at with John is that people forget that this guy's really big. Like, he told us last year, like, he was like at one point like over 290, and he had to bring his weight down. When you're big like that and you're thick and you have some weight on you, it takes longer to recover from some injuries, especially when you're a basketball player, who needs to be springy and needs to get up. There's football players that could, like, the Steelers offensive line deals with injuries all the time, right? But it's different when you got to play a game that's different. And I think that's what John's going through, is that, Jeff said it's not an injury thing. He also said it's not an off the court issue thing. I think the big thing is that John doesn't trust his body yet. I think that I think medically, like, his knee that he needed work on, I think it's medically healed. But, like, Devin Bush's knee was medically healed, and it was obvious he was not the same player when he came back from it, because he sucked, but he couldn't trust himself to jump, off of his knee because the injury kind of killed his confidence and just the natural reaction to that. Some athletes, they never get that back. There's times that happens to players in all sports, and you never feel the same way after a certain injury. And I think what's happening is Pitt's like, look, like you said, after Sacred Heart, when they saw that they could win with Fetty, I'm pretty sure Jeff Capel was like, look, John, if you just need to work on yourself. Like, be confident in yourself. Still practice, do everything you need to do. But this team can win games without him right now, and they have. I mean, he has not been the carrying factor in really any of their wins this year. And I think that's significant for the team to show the growth that Jeff Capel was able to put it together without the player that was presumed to be the superstar of this group. But I think it shows that they can have patience for him. But will it happen this year? I'd like to think so, but it not happening. It still is early in the season. It's early January. We got all this month and then all next month before the conference tournaments start up. But I think we'll be able to get more of a sense probably by next week or the week after that if John is ever coming back this year.
And make no mistake, I mean, he would make a difference on this team, and even if he's not playing his best basketball, because it's hard to determine how, when John Hugley's playing at his best, how that would mix with how Pitt plays the game with this year's team. We never saw top of the line Hugley with a Blake Hinson or a Nelly Cummings or a Greg Elliott. We never really got that. So I don't think, even if he does return, we'll ever see Pitt this year play through him like they did in years prior. However, I do think that Hugley brings certain things to the table that other players don't. One of it's experience, another of it's just depth. I mean, you got to give props to the Diaz-Graham twins for coming in and giving a full effort. And there's been some games where one or the other has made a big shot or played some decent defense, but his size would be great coming off the bench just to give Federico a blow, or when Federico gets in foul trouble, just having someone else. That depth in the front court would be huge for Pitt, and I'm sure Capel would love to see it have that, but he's not going to rush him back. That's really the only thing that's been made clear throughout all of this.
Yeah, and I think you think back too. You got to remember, John Hugley really only had 1 year for Pitt. When he came in, he got suspended with his his court issues, so he never got to play really with Justin Champagnie and that crew. And then he comes back last year, and he was really good. And it was really him and Jamarius Burton that held up the team, but was not nearly enough. And now this year, when we talked to Greg Elliott before the season, and him and Greg, he called Greg Elliott before he had chosen Pitt, and he was like, "Man, if you can get here, you being able to shoot on the outside and me on the inside, we can be a force." And Pitt hasn't had that, and I think that if a healthy John Hugley, that even if he's not superstar mode with this roster, they probably win that Clemson game because they're able to do more in the paint or limit Clemson more in the paint, where they had a 20-point disadvantage to the Tigers. So I do think it would be a boost to Pitt to finally have him. Just no idea when that'll be.
So David wants to know, is Pitt even the best basketball team in the city of Pittsburgh? What makes you think the Panthers can beat Duquesne? Well, David, that's a good question, and I'll keep it running here. That way, if anyone's tuning in midway, they can see the question still. But I'll say this: I saw Duquesne play last week against VCU, and I went there with our coworker Jason Mackey. Love going to the Cooper Fieldhouse. Great venue. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend checking it out. And Duquesne is a fun team to watch this year. They have a lot of depth. I think they have some exciting talent, and I'm a big fan personally of Keith Dambrot. I covered him previously. Very nice guy.
Good coach.
Great coach. But what I will say is this: even though I watched Duquesne really blow VCU out of the water last week, a team that beat Pitt, I just don't think that their game would translate well against the Panthers. I don't see anyone on that team who could guard a Blake Hinson or Jamarius Burton for 40 minutes. I just think that Pitt has more talent. And while, if you could play the comparison game and you could say, they beat VCU, Pitt lost to VCU. I think if Pitt played VCU now, the way it's playing, Pitt would win by a pretty significant margin. I also think that Pitt probably could beat Michigan if they played it again. In West Virginia, maybe not. I think that's probably the best team that Pitt lost to this year, but it would be close. What I'm trying to say is that was a different Pitt team, that 1-3 team. Clemson's coach even pointed that out after after he beat Pitt on Saturday. But Duquesne should be recognized. I think that the loss on Saturday to Richmond kind of hurts their resume a little bit, but still 12-5 overall. Their Ken Palm rating, they're at 114. So they're in the same conversation as teams like Vanderbilt, who also beat Pitt, but they're a middle-of-the-road SEC team. Notre Dame, who's a middle to bottom tier ACC team. San Francisco, a team that made the tournament as an at-large bid last year, a team that played Gonzaga tough not too long ago. So, there is something to it. But, the bottom line is Pitt, for one reason or another, has the opportunity to make the tournament as an at-large bid. Duquesne, that's not happening for the Dukes this year. Even if they win out, I still think that they're probably going to have to win the Atlantic 10 tournament to even have a shot at making the big dance. And I think just that notion of thinking and everything else I said makes Pitt the better team right now. Carter, any disagreements?
Just that I think Duquesne deserves credit for the wins that it's been able to put together. And ever since say, and I said if these two teams clashed in November, I think that that Duquesne could catch Pitt on a bad day and catch them. If they played right now, Pitt would dog walk Duquesne out of the arena. It would be terrible. It would be embarrassing. It would look like an old school City game with Jamie Dixon or Ben Howland just beating Duquesne up and down the court for most of it. I don't think I've checked out a little bit of what Duquesne's been able to do. It was a tough loss they had on their last one, but yeah, Pitt the way Pitt's playing now, Pitt has beaten some of these ranked opponents without shooting the ball well.
Yeah.
If Pitt shot the ball well, Duquesne would never have a chance. If Pitt didn't shoot the ball well, they do what they did against Virginia and North Carolina and just say Jamarius Burton attack, Blake Hinson attack, and Duquesne wouldn't have a chance. And then if Greg Elliott or Nelly Cummings got hot, I think Federico would be a problem for them. Yeah. I just think there's a reason why AC, like the Power 5 conferences, get that deferential treatment. Because there's a talent gap between them and all the other conferences. And again, Duquesne deserves a ton of credit for what Keith Dambros's been able to do and how they've been competitive this year. And I think if they met, before late November, I think that they could have, snuck Pitt and caught them sleeping. But right now, Pitt is a much better team.
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap this point up, I just look at Pitt's wins. The Panthers have been able to shut down really a top-tier player against some of the better teams in the ACC. Just the way they've guarded some of Virginia's guys, the way they've defended against some North Carolina players, NC State players. Like, you can look at every ACC win they have, and you can point at, this would be, if this dude was in the Atlantic 10, he'd be the Atlantic 10 player of the year. And Pitt shut him down. I don't think there'd be anyone on Duquesne's roster that Pitt would really have a problem defending. So right. I think that would make the difference. But we'll move on now. Bernie wants to know, does the ACC's down year help or hurt Pitt's chances to make the tournament? And that's a really good question. The ACC right now with the latest AP poll has 3 teams in it. It has Virginia at number 13, it has Miami, I believe it's 16, and Duke is number 24. The Panthers, of course, beat Virginia last week. They play Miami twice later on this year, and they play the Blue Devils Wednesday in Durham. I'll say this. I thought at one point in time, the ACC being a down year would hurt Pitt, simply because it gave the Panthers a limited amount of opportunities to earn quad 1 wins. However, they just beat North Carolina and Virginia in 2 of their last 3 games. And they're going to have 2 opportunities against Miami still and a big opportunity on the road in Durham. And those aren't now must wins. I think if Pitt wins once against Miami and just doesn't get upset by a low-level ACC team, if its losses for the rest of the year come against, top programs like Duke or North Carolina on the road, maybe once against Miami, and then you lose to other good teams on the level of like a Clemson, so maybe like a Wake Forest or something like that, I think Pitt will be fine. But it took a while for the Panthers to build up to where they are now. But now I think, they will benefit from the ACC being down because they can beat up on everyone because they have won the big games and earned those quad 1 victories. Chris?
Right. And like you said, there's still those on the menu. They got Duke Wednesday. They got Miami twice, North Carolina again. And I'd even say still Syracuse or Virginia Tech would be worthy wins, like, not world breaking, but like solid, like, hey, they didn't let these teams catch them slipping. A loss to Louisville, Florida State, or Georgia Tech, those could be catastrophic, and those can really put a dent in. And those are some of the things that have happened that have led to some of the free falls Pitt has experienced. I think that's the other big thing is, does Pitt experience a free fall? Because any time that they've gotten on a run under Jeff Capel, or with a few wins, it's been met with just a catastrophic failure after failure, just a series of just dominoes that fall that make things happen. I don't think that this team will let that happen. I think that there's a lot more veterans on this team that when one thing doesn't work, they have so many other ways to win. And I think we've seen that with the way they've played. They've gone up against teams like North Carolina where they could feed a Baycott and they could score from a lot of different angles. They were able to figure that out on defense, bring the game back to the way that they play on offense. Clemson, even though they lost that game, Pitt, adjusted after Clemson was dominating early, figured things out, and then took over the game until the last 4 minutes when they just went ice cold from the field and Clemson went red hot and they lost by 1. I think that Pitt's a team that can manage a lot more situations this year. So yeah, I think the ACC, it's not going to hurt them. I think if they can finish with 20 wins in the regular season and pull off 2 more in the tournament, I think that they're, like I said before in our Christmas episode of the mailbag, I think this team can go dancing.
So our final question comes from Steve. He wants to know what needs to happen in order for Pitt to be ranked. Pitt received a pair of votes in the AP poll that came out Monday morning. Chris, do you want to give your take on this, and then I'll follow you?
Yeah, I think they need to. I think regardless of what happens at Duke, if they beat Duke, it'd be a big help. But they need to basically win out until they beat Miami. If they can get to the Miami game, not lose to any of the sad teams, and Miami's still ranked and they beat them, I think that might be what gets them more noticed, because then at most they'll have 2 conference losses, and by then it will be February when the next vote happens. So I think that's their best ticket right now. I think people just got to remember, Pitt's stigma is still on it for the past 6-7 years of just being terrible. And there were times where people thought, like Justin Champagnie. I think this is a big part of why I actually think this team is different this year than a lot of other Pitt teams. When they were 8-2 and they just beat Duke, not only did they say, Pitt is back, but like they were saying, we're being overlooked, we're being this, they were concerned about their rankings. They were checking what was being said about them. And not that these guys aren't, but they aren't letting us know about it. Like you and I asked them questions about about their status and like Blake Hinson, he like dismisses it like it's insulting to ask him that question. Jamarius Burton's like, we don't got time for that. And down the line, all the play, even some of the younger guys like Fetty, he doesn't care. He's just like, listen, man, I just got to get better for tomorrow. And I think that's what's built the winning culture that they have right now on this roster in this locker room. And I think that's what's going to carry them to a lot of these wins. But if they beat Duke, if they win the next 6 games, because you got Duke, then you got 4 games that you need to crush. You need to not and don't have to crush. Just come out with wins. Don't let any of these slips. Georgia Tech, Louisville, Florida State, Wake Forest. You win those, you'll amass more votes, probably get close to the top 25. But if you win those and then you beat Miami, that will be, I think, the game that gets them in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They need to go 4-1 in their next 5 games. So I don't think they'll be ranked prior to the end of this month. No. Maybe a blowout victory over Duke and then a win over Georgia Tech on Saturday could do it. I just don't think Duke's ranked high enough. I think that Duke they're 24, and I think they're at that 24 spot more because of the name of the program rather than what the program's doing. I mean, the Blue Devils got blown out last week by NC State, and they almost blew a double-digit lead on the road at Boston College and hung on to win by a single point there. So, I mean, Duke's not viewed by really anyone right now as a team that's playing good basketball. So I think even if Pitt does go in and beat the Blue Devils in Cameron Indoor Wednesday, I mean, it would certainly be a good win long-term because, like I said about North Carolina, Duke's going to figure it out. It's too talented not to. The Blue Devils will end up being a ranked team, I think, in the final regular season poll. But right now, it's struggling. So I don't know how much that win will help. Vice versa, I don't know how much that loss would hurt Pitt, because I think that a lot of people would view Duke and Pitt on a similar playing field right now, and the home court advantage would give the Blue Devils a little bit of an edge. So I think if Pitt could go 4-1 in its next 5 games, finishing out the rest of the month of January, really, they would play, well, the final game in January would be against Miami. So if it could go 5-1 leading up to that, I think it has a pretty good chance where it, regardless of how it would do against Miami in its final game of the month of January, I think Pitt would be fine. So, played tough against Duke. don't get upset by Georgia Tech, Florida State, and Louisville, 3 of the worst teams in the ACC, and a big win at home over Wake Forest, who is around the same level as Pitt right now, as a bubble team looking to fight its way into the tournament. So I think getting that done, would put it in a really good spot to face Miami at the end of the month and get inside the top 25. But ranking aside, I know a lot of fans would love to see the Panthers in the top 25 right now. There's a lot of ranked or non-ranked teams who make the tournament as well. So just accumulating wins, regardless of what the AP poll says at any point in time in the year, that's not necessarily an accurate reflection on who gets in and who doesn't come the end of March. It's not as direct of a comparison as to what we see for college football. So as long as the Panthers keep winning, that's what really matters here, not where a couple of writers here and there throughout the country view them in the hierarchy. It's going to come down to earning big wins and avoiding ugly losses. So that's all we got for today. Chris, any final words as we wrap up today's show?
No, just I think that it's still an exciting time. I'll say that I think that the game against, even though Clemson was disappointed that they lost, the fact that they fought through that game and it took such a crazy hot streak for at Clemson at the end for them to lose that, for Pitt to lose that game. But I think the biggest takeaway I had was that was the best environment, or the loudest environment and the most people that I've seen at the Pitt in my last 3 years covering this team. So I think Pitt fans are starting to get the message. You hope that they can get more of the message soon. And again, if they beat a lot of teams, I wonder if that game against Miami could be the first sellout that we've seen since Duke came in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you there. That was a fun atmosphere, and I think that team deserves to play in front of a big crowd, considering everything that it's gone through this year with losing one of its best players to injuries, losing a high-end prospect due to off-the-court stuff, and battling back from a 1-3 start to earn wins over North Carolina and Virginia. I think it showed its fans that, hey, we're worth tuning in and rooting for. So it was fun to cover that game in that type of atmosphere, and it would certainly be fun to see more atmospheres like that before the year comes to a close. So that's all we got for this week's Pitt Mailbag. Be sure to submit your questions to us through email or on Twitter. Anytime you have them, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and keep tuning in. We've got content every day here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.